All right, so anyone trying to figure out what's going on in Ukraine, especially all this talk about a peace deal, well, let me tell you, things just got a whole lot more interesting after Trump and Macron's little meeting to discuss the war.
Yeah, no kidding. It's definitely a tense situation with, we're 3 years into this brutal war, and Russia's got their hands on a good chunk of Ukraine, like 20%, and the human cost, it's just devastating.
Yeah, absolutely. Zelensky himself said over 46,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died already. And now with Trump back in the White House, well, it feels like things could go any which way.
Yeah, upheaval is a good way to put it. Trump's already talking about getting a deal with Putin within weeks. Seems pretty confident he can just negotiate with Putin. He even mentioned a rare earth minerals deal with Zelensky as part of the whole thing.
Rare earth minerals, that's interesting. What do you think that's all about?
Well, it definitely suggests that Trump's got his own agenda here. It could be that he's looking at this more from an economic angle, America first and all that. It's like he's bringing that same deal-making approach to this whole conflict.
So you're saying he might be okay with giving up some territory just to get a quick win? But Macron, on the other hand, he seems to be taking a much harder line.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's made it very clear that peace can't mean Ukraine just giving up, and he's pushing hard for strong security guarantees for Ukraine.
Right, and remember when he corrected Trump about how much Europe's been helping out?
Oh yeah, that was a big moment. Macron wasn't about to let Trump misrepresent things. He was like, hold on a sec, Europe's been giving a ton of financial aid to Ukraine, not just loans. It kind of showed the difference in how they're approaching this whole thing. Macron's really focused on a lasting peace, something that actually protects Ukraine, not just a quick fix.
Gotcha. So, about these security guarantees, what would those actually look like, and why are they so important for Ukraine?
Well, basically, it would be other countries, maybe even NATO members, promising to defend Ukraine if Russia attacks again. It's about making Russia think twice before trying anything else and giving Ukraine the confidence to rebuild without being scared of another invasion.
Like a deterrent.
Exactly. And speaking of deterrence, that whole thing about peacekeepers was kind of surprising. Both Trump and Macron mentioned the idea of sending European peacekeepers to Ukraine as part of a peace deal.
Yeah, I think Putin would actually go for that. What would their role even be?
That's the question, isn't it? Macron specifically called it an assurance force, which makes it sound more like they'd be there to prevent more fighting, not actually get involved in combat.
Right. And while we're talking about the international scene, we can't ignore that UN vote. The U.S. siding with Russia and North Korea against a resolution condemning the invasion. That was a shocker. Even France and the U.K. abstained on a separate resolution. Not a good sign, right?
It's definitely worrying. That vote shows a pretty big shift in U.S. foreign policy under Trump. Remember, at the beginning of the war, the West was pretty united. Well, this is a total 180. By siding with Russia, the U.S. is sending a message to everyone, allies included, that they're putting their own interests first, even if it means going against the rest of the world or leaving struggling democracies hanging.
So what does it all mean? All these leaks about the peace plan are raising eyebrows. Sounds like Ukraine would have to give up Crimea and the Donbas to Russia. Then there's talk of delaying Ukraine joining NATO for 20 years, plus setting up a demilitarized zone patrolled by those peacekeepers.
Yeah, let's break that down because each point is a big deal. Giving up Crimea and Donbas would be a huge win for Putin. Basically, it's like rewarding him for starting the war and sets a bad example for future conflicts.
And delaying NATO membership for 20 years.
That's a huge concession. A lot of people see NATO membership as like the ultimate protection for Ukraine. Delaying it leaves them vulnerable for a long time.
What about all the European leaders? It sounds like they're freaking out, trying to make sure Trump listens to their concerns. What are they so worried about?
Well, they're right to be worried. The stakes are super high. A weak agreement could embolden Putin and make the region even more unstable. Then Europe might have to take on more of the defense burden if the U.S. isn't fully committed to protecting Ukraine.
And it seems like Zelensky's caught in the middle of all this. What does this all mean for him and for Ukraine?
Zelensky's in a tough spot, that's for sure. He's leading a country that's been through hell, his people are suffering, and he's got pressure coming from all sides.
He needs to find a way to secure a lasting peace that protects Ukraine. But he's also dealing with Trump, who's unpredictable, and a fractured international community. What a mess.
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk for sure.
This Trump-Macron meeting feels like a major turning point in this whole war. But it's anyone's guess what happens next. What are your first thoughts on Zelensky's position in all this?
Well, if we look back at what Zelensky said before, he's been wary of Trump's approach ever since they first met during Trump's first term. Back then, Zelensky felt like their talks were all talk and no action. And now, with this peace plan going around, his concerns seem even more valid.
And you gotta wonder how everyday Ukrainians feel about all this. They've been through years of war, lost loved ones, been forced from their homes. How would they feel about giving up land to the very people who caused all this suffering? It's a moral dilemma on top of everything else.
You're right. For Ukrainians, this war is personal. It's not just about land or politics. It's about who they are, their history, their right to exist as a free country. Asking them to just accept these losses without any justice or accountability, that would be incredibly tough.
And what about the impact on the rest of the world? If this peace plan actually happens, what kind of message does that send to other countries with their own territorial ambitions? Does it mean aggression pays off? Does it make other wannabe aggressors think they can get away with it because the international community won't stand up to them?
Yeah, those are the questions that keep world leaders up at night. What happens here could change global politics for years to come. If the West, especially the US, looks weak or divided, it could embolden authoritarian regimes and undermine the whole system of international rules that has mostly kept the peace since World War II. The stakes are incredibly high.
It's a tangled mess.
Yeah.
But it feels like we're entering a crucial phase in this conflict. The decisions made in the next few weeks could decide the fate of Ukraine, the future of Europe, maybe even the balance of power in the world.
No doubt about it. It is a lot to take in, but super important if we want to really understand what's at stake here. And what's really interesting is that each of these players is coming at this with their own baggage, their own goals. Like for Zelensky, this isn't just about some peace treaty, it's about survival. He's trying to figure out international relations while his country is facing a threat to its very existence.
Makes you think what's going through his head right now.
Yeah.
What are his options, really? Does he go along with this peace plan, or does he fight back even if it means more war?
That's the big question, isn't it? He's walking a tightrope. He knows how much this war is costing, the damage it's doing to his people, his country. But he also can't be seen as giving in to Putin, surrendering Ukrainian land without a fight. He has to find that balance, a peace that keeps Ukraine intact, but also recognizes the reality of the situation.
It's just heartbreaking, honestly. To think about the weight of those decisions, what it could mean for millions of Ukrainians. It's hard to wrap your head around it all. And it really highlights the human cost, this whole thing, the individual stories that get lost in all the politics.
Absolutely. We can't forget that behind all the headlines, all the political maneuvering, there are real people whose lives have been shattered by this war. Families ripped apart, homes destroyed, dreams put on hold, and the trauma. Just imagine living with that constant fear of bombs, not knowing if your loved ones are safe, having to run from your home, your country, with nothing but the clothes on your back.
It's a stark reminder that peace isn't just about stopping the fighting. It's about giving people a chance to rebuild, to heal, to move forward. And that takes time, resources, a real commitment from the rest of the world.
Exactly. And it needs a peace agreement that gets to the root of the problem, not just a Band-Aid solution. A peace that gives Ukraine real, solid security guarantees, makes sure those responsible for war crimes are held accountable, and creates a path for reconciliation and rebuilding. Otherwise, we're just setting ourselves up for more violence and instability down the line.
So what can be done? What are the next steps in this whole mess?
Well, everyone's watching Zelensky right now. There's talk he might go to Washington to meet with Trump. If that happens, it's a huge chance for him to lay out his vision for peace, to push back against any concessions he can't live with, and to rally international support for Ukraine.
Sounds like he's between a rock and a hard place.
He is. And we can't forget about Macron. He's probably going to keep at it with the diplomacy, working with other European leaders to try and sway Trump, making sure that any peace deal isn't just convenient, but actually fair and something that will last. It's a tricky balancing act, trying to keep everyone happy while also sticking to international law and human rights.
And then there's Putin, the wild card. Hard to tell what he's really thinking or what his game plan is.
Oh, he's playing chess, that's for sure. And thinking long term, he's already got some of what he wanted, control of important parts of Ukraine. But he might want more. He might be trying to weaken NATO, cause trouble between Western allies, reassert Russia's dominance in the region. It's a high-stakes game, and the whole world's watching.
It's clear that the choices made in the next few weeks will have a huge impact.
Yeah.
Not just for Ukraine, but for the whole world.
Absolutely. We're at a turning point. The path we choose now will shape history for generations to come. Do we go for the easy wins, the quick political points? Or do we stand up for democracy, for sovereignty, for human rights? There's a lot riding on this.
Makes you wonder how much say, the average person has in all this? Can people actually influence these high-level talks? Can they hold their leaders accountable for the decisions they make?
That's a really important question. In a democracy, public opinion matters. It shapes the political landscape, it influences policy, and in a situation as complicated and serious as this, it's more important than ever for people to stay informed, to talk about these issues respectfully, to let their elected officials know what they think.
So what can people do to stay informed and engaged?
Plenty of things. Follow reliable news sources, talk about these things online respectfully, reach out to your representatives, support humanitarian groups working in Ukraine. Every voice makes a difference. Every action, even the small ones, can help build a more peaceful and just world.
It's easy to feel helpless when you see a conflict this big and complicated, but we're not powerless. Each of us can play a part in shaping the future.
That's right.
It starts with understanding the issues, feeling for those affected by the war, and being willing to talk even when it's hard. We can't just sit back and watch. This is our world, our future. We have a responsibility to shape it.
We've spent a lot of time talking about the politics of all this, but we can't forget that at its heart, this is a human tragedy. Millions of lives have been turned upside down, families torn apart, communities destroyed.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the high-level stuff, the geopolitics and strategy, but we got to remember the human cost of all this. The trauma, the displacement, the loss, it's all very real. And it's going to have a lasting impact on Ukraine and its people, even if they do get a peace agreement.
Yeah, it's hard to think about all those long-term consequences. Rebuilding trust, bringing communities back together, healing those psychological wounds. Those are challenges that could take years, maybe even decades, to overcome. Absolutely. We're talking about a whole generation of kids who've grown up with nothing but conflict and displacement. And the economic impact is going to be huge, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe and the whole world. The geopolitical landscape, well, it's changed forever. The world is a completely different place than it was before February 2022.
It really makes you think. It raises the stakes for these peace talks, right? This isn't just about drawing lines on a map or scoring political points. It's about creating a future where people can rebuild their lives, where there's a chance for stability and peace.
Exactly. Any peace agreement that's going to last has to do more than just stop the fighting. It has to address the root causes of the conflict, provide security guarantees that actually mean something, and make sure there's justice for the victims of war crimes. If we don't do that, well, we're just setting the stage for more conflicts down the road.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all this?
I think the main takeaway is this. We're at a crossroads. The decisions that are made in the coming weeks and months, they're going to have huge consequences. We can choose the easy way out, focus on short-term gains and political convenience, but that might just drag out the suffering and instability. Or we can choose a harder path, a more complicated path, but it's a path that could lead to a more just and lasting peace. The choice is ours, and it's a choice we have to make together.
Powerful stuff. And it reminds us that we all have a part to play in shaping the future, whether it's staying informed, having real conversations about these issues, supporting humanitarian efforts, or holding our leaders accountable. We can all do something to help build a world where peace has a chance. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, folks. Stay tuned for more explorations of the issues that matter most.